All right, everyone. Welcome to Legacies. I'm joined this week by Mitchell Osak of Quanta Consulting. Mitchell, how you doing?
Doing great, Tom. How are you?
I'm very well, sir. I will remind our audience that Legacies is brought to you by Avail, leaders in sustainable vape hardware. Mitchell, you were just at Benzinga.
Within 24 hours.
I'm always interested. I don't do a lot of events. Everyone's always, were you at this event? Are you going to this event? I'm like, no, I'm not, which is so strange, right? I'm so in the industry, but I don't travel to very many events. I think it was my days spent in tech and commuting to Toronto, 4 hours plus a day for 5 years. I'm like, I don't want to travel anymore. But I do appreciate you joining me, sir. You've got quite the background in cannabis, let alone just in consulting, your work with P&G. I want to dig into it, but I mean, you've been on a number of podcasts, you've been on a number of shows, you've explained that background. Our audience sometimes has some crossover, but I would like to go into a bit of your background just so people understand who's this guy flaming the industry. He has no no course to do so. Not saying we'll get there, but even at the onset of the call, we kind of joked, and you're like, "What are we going to talk about?" I'm like, "That's the beauty of the chair I sit in. We don't know where it's going to go."
Well, let's just say before I get into my background, I do flame facets of the industry and I celebrate and illuminate other facets of the industry, which I hope we'll get into a little bit later. And then many parts of it I just leave alone because I don't know a lot about it. So
Right.
today will be the best of times, the worst of times for some operators, and some will escape with their heights. But without boring you with a long infomercial, I'm born and bred in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. I have an MBA, University of Toronto, undergraduate degree in military history, which you might think is an odd preparatory education for cannabis, but it's actually been amazing.
I bet.
Um, there are a lot of overlaps between fighting wars on the battlefield and fighting wars in governments and in regulatory bodies, and we'll
Yeah.
talk about that, I'm sure.
Yeah.
But worked at P&G, as you said, on some very iconic brands like Ivory Snow and Tide and Cascade. Started, grew, and sold a robotics company, which also gave me a lot of insights to actually running a real
Mhm.
business and what's required there. And after I sold it, I fell into the consulting space where I did a variety of different things for the CPG, pharmaceutical, and financial services industries. So I gleaned some insights around the capital markets, drug development, manufacturing, but I literally fell into the legal cannabis world in Canada in late 2016
Mm.
when the 30 licensed medical producers were positioning themselves for for getting ready for the onset of Canadian legalization, which happened, as you know, in October of 2018. So
Yeah.
being around a long time in dog years, 56 years. And for those of you who don't like dogs, that's 8 years
Well, those
in
that don't
legal
like dogs
cannabis.
can just shut the podcast off right now.
Absolutely. I mean, who doesn't like a dog? But
Yeah.
that's a whole other story.
That's a
But
whole other story. That's a whole other story.
so, after starting in 2016, I've worked with a couple of hundred clients in Canada and many other parts of the world, seen a lot, seen success stories, seen massive flame outs,
Mhm.
seen a lot of Walking Dead, which is what we're seeing right now, but also being able to glean what are now best practices, what's working, what's not, both from a leadership and a business model perspective. And I'm sure we'll
Yeah.
get into all of that.
Yeah, totally. And I caught your for anyone that's not subscribed to your Substack, there's some jewels in there. All of them are, but I mean, the one even that I caught this morning, I was just going to start with what is the formula for winning in cannabis? That was the most recent that you dropped today. There's so many things that we can go into, and I want to pause just briefly on. You said it, 200 plus clients. Wow. One, where do you find the time? It's only been a short amount of time, 2016 joining the industry. Man, that seems like forever ago now, does it not? Like, I think back, so I remember the lead up. I was early licensed under MMAR, followed through MMPR, and then eventually we got into the Cannabis Act, which was October, correct me if I'm wrong, was it October 17th or 18th, 2017? And then 1 year later, we go full rec. And I joined right at the onset with medical. So when you talk about the medical side of it, I thought we were going to have a longer we'll talk about this, but I thought we were gonna have a longer transitional period, and I've asked multiple times, did we transition to rec too quickly, and have we abandoned medical? But in those early days, did you ever foresee how many guests I've had that say they fell into cannabis? Did did you see yourself ever in a million years working in cannabis, working with so many different client types? You know, you've got new entrants, you've got ones that are just trying to figure things out. You know, I love the methodology of testing SKUs and pricing models. I think that makes a lot of sense. You're a big proponent of that. But did you foresee this? Like Mitchell Osak will be working in cannabis.
Um, no. Uh, um, However, having said that, and however, I grew up in a world that, if I'm sure many of your listeners and readers are a little younger than me, but there was a couple of movies. It was called Wayne's World. You might know about it,
I
Tom.
know Wayne's World. Party
So
on,
I
Garth.
Yeah, so I grew up in the Wayne's World of weed.
Mhm,
So it was around. I mean, it was suburban Toronto. I won't attest to really understanding the cannabis community as it exists in certain places like Los
mhm.
Angeles and San Francisco and New
Sure.
York, but certainly there was a lot of weed and hash around, and I was in the cannabis world, although a certain aspect of that.
Mhm.
Um, what I loved about it, in addition to obviously the plant and the benefits of that and so on, was this massive illicit economy
Mhm.
coexisting. Yet at the same moment, many of us knew, and it didn't take rocket science to know, that it was only a matter of time before some facet of that would be legalized. We
Yeah.
saw medical legalized through the Canadian courts, but now I'm nerding back to my military history inclination. There are so many vices in the world that were formerly illegal:
Mhm.
porn, gambling, just to name two, that when the government figured out how much money they can make off of taxing it
Yeah.
and how much easier it is to control it, it was only a matter of time before enough momentum was built up to legalize adult use cannabis
Yeah.
in Canada and many other places. So once the shoe fell when it came to medical, it was a question of not if, but when.
Mhm.
So when the Trudeau government, the Liberal government at that time, and you probably remember this, sent out a trial balloon. The 30 medical cannabis LPs that I was working with at the time, and they're the old names that you would know, like Chronos and
Yeah.
Aurora and all those
Organograms and all
companies.
them. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, they knew, uh, the stable doors were open, and it was just a question of how it was gonna be legalized.
Mhm.
So, not what, anybody in this industry can make those predictions, what's gonna happen. The key questions is when something will happen and how it will happen.
Yeah.
And that was the very interesting part of, like, 2016, because as you can probably remember, the tax rates were changing at the last minute, and the rules and regs were changing at the last minute. So we all knew it was going to happen, but what
Mhm.
was going to happen? How was retail going to unfold in different provinces? We saw, major pivots in places like Ontario where
Yeah.
we live. And that is the fascinating part of this industry and also the hell raising part of it.
Yeah. Man, you're walking me through memory lane so much just as you're
Good.
explaining it because, first let me go back. So 30 plus years of consumption. I mean, you're growing up in in Ontario, I think, the root of cannabis was Toronto, we'd visit and growing up, I do have a question about growing up as a Lithuanian Jew in that culture and what that looked like because like I'm friends with so many Jewish people. There's a lot of Jewish people that work in the industry and most of them won't come right out and say, "Yeah, I have a history." I mean, it was very much frowned upon, I would assume. But, a lot of them are like, "Yeah, of course I consumed. What are you crazy?" But as you're talking about that, I never in a million years, other than, the glimpses of medical and when that was coming and rolling out, I never thought we would honestly, and this is, I think, the first time I've ever said this, I never thought we'd have a recreational market. I thought they would 100%, being the government that is, would capitalize on the medical side and I didn't think we would see that. Now, in those illicit days, I do remember having multiple conversations with this illicit operators. You know, I was in that space and I had asked, listen, if you could pay taxes on the money and the cash that you're moving so that you could get a mortgage, so that you could do this, do that, would you? And they're like, If it was reasonable, yes, absolutely, I would move to that. And now we've got this great divide, and I think the wedge is even bigger now, where you've got those very independent, illicit individuals that are like, fuck the government, fuck the taxes, screw your regime. I am not getting into that. But some of those are still the same individuals that said, yeah, I'll pay taxes, no problem. So then we fast forward to, we go through the medical, we see what that looked like. You remember Prairie Plant Life or Life Systems or whatever it was, growing weed in the bunker somewhere out in the prairies, whatever was going on. And then we come into this medical framework and it becomes robust and, Allard case, all that goes through. The federal government says you've got to shit or get off the pot here. Like you can't keep stringing all these patients along forever. And then we get a system, and then all of a sudden we're in rec, and I'm like, wow, okay, that moved quickly. Did you foresee the complications? I don't know, Mitchell. I think I'm just looking at it from why wasn't there more framework, I guess, for the provinces to roll out retail, considering what we went through in Ontario? And would that have helped or hindered, I guess? That'd be my first question, first area I want to talk about.
Okay, it's just first of all, for your audience, I'm only a 50% Lithuanian Jew.
Okay.
I'm also a 25% Polish Jew and a 25% Austrian Jew.
Okay.
It in my family, which has been in Canada like 130 years,
Yeah.
that's an important distinction. So
Wow.
I
I
don't
get
want to
yes,
alienate.
absolutely. Let's make sure that everyone is aware.
Yeah, so I don't want to alienate my family in Argentina, the United States, Israel,
Yes, yes.
and because there's nobody left in those other places. But that's a whole other
Yeah,
conversation.
I'll say.
So, so I think your question is, did I foresee all the trials and tribulations and the ups and downs of the industry before it happened?
Mhm.
I'm going to say something really arrogant and douchey
Okay.
because there's so much I don't know about this industry. There's so much that changes. I was at Benzinga. I was schooled on so many things.
Mm.
But the reality is, I did anticipate a lot of these problems.
Mhm.
And I'm going to tell you why. And when you hear what I'm going to say, you'll probably think, you know what, that's kind of reasonable. If I sat down and I didn't come from the cannabis world where, it was very closed and, very much based on trust and not connected to other industries, you could see how they would have had their perceptions and then why I had mine.
Yeah.
So it starts with some truisms,
Okay.
with the government. And number one, the government never does anything right the first time.
Truth number 1.
So
Absolutely.
if I'm sure you have lots of readers and listeners in Toronto, all I have to say is 2 words, the Eglinton subway,
Okay.
okay?
I'm not familiar enough with it, but I could just imagine.
It's going into a second generation of completion.
Oh my god.
The government does some things very well,
Mhm.
but anything new, a bolt out of the blue, which is what cannabis was.
Yeah,
We weren't the first, we were the second, Uruguay was the first,
that's right.
but I don't think anybody realistically anticipated, including people at Health Canada who were in charge of this, that this would be working great from the get-go.
Mhm.
That's number one. Number two is if you related to number one, if you understand how the Canadian political system works, and it is maybe a little less dysfunctional than the United States, but nowhere near perfect. You understand there are federal responsibilities, provincial responsibilities. Like for example, in Canada, age of majority is a provincial thing, like how old
Mhm.
to buy weed, but things like national standards around products and all of that, that's a federal. So whenever you have competing bodies and competing bureaucracies, you're going to have what we call in software like a kludge. You're going to
Mhm.
have not the perfect solution, the consensual solution. So what works to get the bill through Parliament? And that's what we ended up getting. And so we're federally illegal with very different rules according to retail structure, according to age or majority by province. So, I'm proud to say Canada was the first, and it's been reasonably successful. Well,
Mhm.
I'll give it a passing grade of around C,
Okay.
but it it could have been an abject failure.
Yeah.
See Eglinton Subway. Um, but, you could have expected the taxes to be high. We did when we were doing our initial planning work because the government primarily sees this as a cash grab.
Yeah.
Is that such a huge insight for me? No. They're alcohol's a cash grab, gambling's a cash grab, tobacco's a cash. So cannabis is not going to be a cash grab. And I'm going to say one other thing, with peace and love to my cannabis community brothers and sisters. I love the product. I love how it helps people. Without a doubt, it's one of the most transformational things that hit Canada and the world in a long time. But it's just a plan.
Mm,
And other stakeholders in this Greek drama we call cannabis don't see it the way we see it, and frankly, see it for its tax potential, see it as a way of shifting resources from fighting the illicit economy, police resources, for example, to regulating it, just like we saw in gambling. So I'm not surprised we got this because all of our goals of all the stakeholders were never aligned and continue not to be aligned. And that simple observation, almost
mm,
common sense, seems to evade, sadly, a lot of people in the industry and a lot of people in government. So, yeah, I anticipated these problems. I thought we would have rectified them sooner, to be perfectly honest. That's what I
mhm.
failed at.
Yeah.
The fact that we're still arguing about these nanny state marketing restrictions in various jurisdictions is ridiculous. In fact, in Ontario, you have major metropolitan areas like Richmond Hill and Markham and Vaughan, where there
Mhm.
are over a million people bordering Toronto that still doesn't have a cannabis store.
Yeah.
That's ridiculous.
Mhm.
But the reality is, we are where we are. We'll still improve. But again, when and how? And I have no clue when that's going to happen.
Yeah. Okay, well, that's a lot to unpack. There's one that I want to hang on the tail of that, though, which is around the marketing side. And when you relate that to the fact that the government ultimately wants to make money off this, I mean, that's that's why they didn't care so much. Yeah, okay, they were getting pressure. I get that, but they saw it as a cash grab. Make no mistake, we all know this. But if they were
One of the reasons, not the
what,
only one.
not the only one, no,
Right.
absolutely, you're right. Yeah, but in in respect to that, wouldn't you think like there'd be some reasonability where they would look at the marketing restrictions and say, okay, if we allowed brands, we can still keep it, somewhat tightened, right? Keep the screws in there a little bit, but we open it just enough where brands and LPs and those players in the industry were able to market a little bit more. I'm not saying everything. I'm not talking, Chrono stage or Budweiser, taking place at Budweiser stage or anything like that. But I'm saying open it up a bit. Would they not be able to attract those fringe consumers, those, illicit purchasers, draw them into the market, and then ultimately sales go up? There's more taxes. Like to me, that's just I don't understand that. Can you break that down and why you think that might be the case or why they're not doing that? I just see there's more money on the table and they're just leaving it there. If I were looking at it from the government side.
With all due respect to you, and I'm not going to be overly loquacious with this answer, but I'm not sure you really understand what motivates the government.
Mm, okay.
And because you're too rational.
Okay.
And that doesn't mean the government's irrational.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's a subtle difference there. So, and I've spoken to many government bureaucrats and so on, and some politicians on this. So, the government, first of all, any job of the government or any bureaucrat, number one, is not to fuck up.
Mm, okay.
Pardon my language.
Fail across.
With on
Don't ever pardon your language on this show. What do
Right.
you mean? Okay, so then they fail miserably all the time.
And they get a lot of heat for it, and politicians don't get reelected.
Mm,
So this was a highly controversial decision to legalize adult use cannabis.
mhm,
There was still a lot of resistance in Canada to doing that. We still have temperance unions here. There's still huge stigmas against cigarettes and so on. So, as they say in the medical community, first do no harm.
mhm,
The government didn't want to exacerbate any more opposition to cannabis, number one.
hmm,
Number two is legalize it, but let's mitigate the potential fallout from healthcare practitioners and so on, and police departments by not making it too easy
mm,
to get the product.
yeah.
And not look like, by allowing a lot of marketing liberalization, that we are, as the government, encouraging this vice to be consumed more.
Hmm,
So this often in the government becomes a balancing act. between competing stakeholders and different needs. How did the government, and this is my opinion, I don't know if it's fact, but how did the government look at this and say, look, we want to maximize tax collection.
Mhm.
We don't want it to look like we're encouraging all these new people. We wanted to bring the illicit economy into a legal economy. And one of the ways they did that was to create a high tax regime. They
Mm.
knew it was high tax at the time. Okay. And that
Yep.
was one of the last decisions they agreed on. So they were studying that very carefully. They had estimates about how big the illicit economy was, which I think cannabis economy, which I think were way overblown
Yeah.
because police departments were using that to justify more
More
policing
money,
resources.
more budget.
You know it. You know it. Like in Canada, I had seen estimates, legitimate estimates, that the cannabis economy in Canada was just consumption was $12 billion.
Mhm.
We're not even close to that. Maybe we'll get there, but not in the foreseeable future. But the reality is that they kind of knew what this was going to be
Yeah.
like. But in their mind, let's get out there, let's check the box on the election pledge, then we'll fix it later on.
Mm.
And that's typically the Canadian approach.
Right, right.
Slow refinement, consensus, bringing everybody in, walk before you want, run before you sprint.
Mhm.
So the odd thing is a lot of the early operators that I was working with, some of the names I spoke to you about,
Yeah.
they actually understood this. There's myths and narratives in Canadian cannabis, how stupid some of those early people are and how unrealistic. And in some cases they were,
Yeah.
but in a lot of cases they understood how this would eventually happen. The
Mm.
problem is that the reforms that we all need are not going as quickly as they need. And what proved to be the case is the government should have moved to sort of an alcohol model,
Right.
but they moved to a tobacco marketing model, getting back to marketing.
Yeah, yeah.
Which was clearly too onerous. As you know, you can't make certain marketing claims, you can't say certain things. And marketing in many cases is education. And
Yes.
what the government has done by not liberalizing enough is they fostered some of the problems they sought to mitigate through excessive use of edibles and so on. And people don't know what the right product is
Mhm.
for them at the right time.
Yeah.
So we'll come back, hopefully. It's just painful.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's the approach I've always taken is, I went to ad school, I built a previous media company, and for me, marketing was a form of education. And it's still marketing. Like don't get me wrong, right? The information you find, I mean, you work P&G. The information you're putting on a package is in most cases a way to educate. Sure, it can be flashy, there's some buzzwords in there, but it's a way to educate you on the product that is in that package or bottle. In these cases, we've lightened it a little bit. I get that. But thank you for that explanation. So, Tom should not be rational to understand government. Check. I understand. Quit using
You know
rationalities.
that.
I do know that, but yeah, again, I sit in that side of it sometimes. There, there was something there though that so you're talking about the early guys. They saw this, they foresaw it, they were thinking that things would change a little bit quicker. Um, how are they still holding on? I mean, like, let's go back to your article that dropped today. What's the winning formula? We've talked about this. I think you mentioned it on our previous call. These zombie corpse or individuals that are just they're the walking dead, and you're wondering, like, I don't get me wrong, I don't want to see any of these companies fail. These are people, these are livelihoods. I get it, but I I mean, I would have closed that debt out long ago, long ago. There's no way I would run a company that long with that much loss, and I'm not targeting any specific company. There's a lot of 'em. We don't have all day. But, like, do you foresee actions taking place soon where they finally just say, "No, we can't do this anymore. We're not gonna continue to report on all these losses." I don't know, man. There's just you see the reports and you wonder how are you still in business? Like no other company in any other industry would go on this long with this much loss.
How many podcasts are you going to have me on to discuss this here?
We might have to do a weekly segment.
You know, I'm not pitching myself, but I think each podcast can focus on one company.
Mm,
Okay, so what do I mean by that? Let's take a client called Canopy.
Okay.
They've never s been my client. I don't consume their products. I don't know them very well. I know some senior people there in the present and in the past.
Mhm.
So what I'm about to tell you is part informed, part conjecture, um, but part the reality of life and business and in general, right? So, Bruce Litton, among others, launched the company, raised a ton of money, spent a ton of money. We know the whole story there.
Mhm.
Did the coup de grace, as they would say in cannabis, raised a ton of money by one of the most prominent beverage alcohol makers in the world, Constellation, raised a
Yeah.
ton of money,
Mhm.
billions. That money can last a long time. Okay, so you ask, how are a lot of them still around? They raised a lot of money early.
Mhm.
Many, not canopy, well, some would say canopy, but I won't. Many in general have frittered away a lot of money, but not all of the money.
Mm.
And if you look at a company like Kronos, for example, they raised a lot of money from a tobacco firm,
Yeah.
and most of that money is still there. Kronos has not gone on a spending spree and spent it,
Right.
and they haven't been profitable. So being able to raise very early large amounts of money gives you a long runway,
Mhm.
even when you spend like a drunken sailor.
Right.
And again, no comment on those two companies. Reason number two, there's still an incredible amount of passion in this business
Mm.
and people who really believe in the plant. And that probably accounts for a lot of the small to medium sized operators that don't have the same cash burn rates as others
Mhm.
that will hang on for dear life. And it's a real testament to our sector and the community and the passion that you still have it. Is that rational? Absolutely. When you look at this from a corporate finance or a wealth management perspective. But as I mentioned earlier, cannabis is a little bit more than that. It's a lifestyle. It borders on a deity to some people.
Yeah.
That, if you look at the history of communist China and the Soviet Union, people will do a lot of crazy things for ideology,
Yes.
crazy
Mm.
things to themselves as well as others. So I'm not suggesting any of these my cannabis friends are communists or fascists or anything like that, but they found the religion
Right.
and they have it.
Hmm.
And you can just do a tour of craft producers in BC and you'll see, or in Humboldt County, and you'll see what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Number three, and I'm gonna always limit my answers to three reasons, not to bore you or the audience. But number three reasons is that many of them are doing just enough and are enjoying just enough success to keep enough fumes and gas in the tank to keep going.
Yeah.
And and that's a testament to their business savviness and resilience, but also the fact that Canada and the United States, in many markets, they are still increasing. The
Mm.
overall market growth is still increasing. So you're getting enough, vapors and oil and gasoline in the tank to keep you going and raise that extra next tranche of money. And they hit it with that strain where you sell out. All the meantime, you're getting your inventory problem under control. You're right sizing your operating model and your greenhouse. And so many of them are doing enough to keep their head afloat. The question is, and maybe this is a segue to what you're going to ask me, is how long can they do it? At the
Yeah.
end of the day, macroeconomic forces
Yeah.
will overcome even the talents and the passions and the skills of amazing management teams and workforces.
Mhm. Well, that is exactly where I was going to go. Because so as I'm thinking it, I'm like, okay, so sitting on a war chest acquired by raises, right? It wasn't an out and conquer, and all of a sudden we've got a ton of money and now our business went to shit. We're just gonna use our war chest of money that we're sitting on. Are they simply playing the long game then? So you mentioned, Kronos and a couple others. They haven't burnt through all the money they've raised. They're still sitting on it. Sometimes they're losing, sometimes they're stable or break even. In most cases, is it just dialing in operations, looking for market expansion, and hoping some of the other ones, like, is it last man standing, last company standing type situation, or like how long? That is my question. How long?
Okay, so before I answer that question, I'm going to say if you're Kronos and you're sitting on six, seven, $800 million
Mm,
and you're invested in short term, low risk financial instruments,
hmm.
you're making way more money than almost every cannabis company right now.
That's so true. That's so true. I never thought of it
Okay.
that way. Yeah.
Well, how many Lithuanian Jews have you spoken to?
Yeah,
I'm
this
joking.
the only one that said that they are.
Well, very proud tradition in Lithuania, I should
Yes.
tell you.
Yeah.
What was your question again, Tom?
Well, it's just how long can they
Yeah.
hold on? But you just made a great
Oh,
point. When you're sitting on that much capital and you've got it reinvested, I mean, you've got some interest checks coming in.
okay. So I'm a consultant, as you know.
Yep.
I deal with that $64,000 question that you just asked every engagement. And there's no simple answer to it.
Hmm.
And I'm going to tell you why. Because if it wasn't for international expansion in cannabis, we know, shipping to Israel and Germany, Australia, and other markets, you would have seen more of that destruction on the road because, they were shipping, LPs are shipping at higher prices, no
Yeah.
excise taxes, and getting rid of their inventory glut.
Mhm.
That was a savior for some firms.
Yeah.
We had COVID, where the government lavished billions of dollars on you and I and corporations.
Mhm.
That was a life raft for a
Right.
lot of Canadian cannabis companies,
Yeah.
okay?
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know why people don't talk about it, but
Hmm.
but it was, okay?
Yeah.
And by the way, that money, I'm not even sure it's all gonna get paid back
Yeah.
to the Canadian government.
Yeah.
You have anywhere from, I don't know the exact numbers, let's say 30 to 50% of all LPs who are in their CRA arrears for excise taxes.
Mhm.
Those arrears could be, let's say, 20 to 40% of all their revenues. So
Right.
they're effectively borrowing from the government at low interest
Yeah.
rates to keep them going.
Yeah.
If someone shows up from the government and says, I want to get paid within a month, you are going to see the evaporation. That's the word.
Yeah.
The evaporation dozens of companies very quickly.
Wow.
Big and small. So a lot of things are keeping these companies afloat. At the same time, and I don't want to sound like a Cassandra or a doomsayer, because I think a lot of this consolidation and evaporation has to happen. It'll be good for the industry,
Mhm.
bad for shareholders, bad for employees, bad in so many ways. And I'm with you.
Yeah.
And maybe good consultants like me get stiff for money, but it will be good overall for the health of the industry. But at the same time that a lot of these Walking Dead zombies are there are great Canadian and some American companies who are emerging as winners, as well as emerging as like phoenixes out of the
Mhm.
ashes of this destruction.
Right. Right. Has the CRA or the government ever come in and called the debt when it comes to, excise tax or anything like that? I mean, they typically just string you along, you work out payment plans, all this kind of stuff, and a vouch to repay. Yeah, okay, we'll get there. But you're right. I mean, what does the government charge now on? Is it 5%, 6%, something like that?
I don't know, but to
It's
answer your
low.
question, it's way lower than what you'd be able to borrow in
Right.
the capital markets from banks and lenders.
Mm. Is that a
Way lower.
strategic play? Are they doing it strategically? I would think the smart ones are.
The you mean the LPs?
Yeah, just not paying
Uh,
like, "Oh, screw it, we owe, $6 million. No, that's only at 5%. We have debt out here. We need to pay some of that off, and we're gonna expand." It's cheap debt.
it is. I'm for following the law and paying taxes, always.
Yeah, absolutely.
Uh,
But you can't tell me that
I
there aren't LPs out there that are using that. We've seen even the strategic plays with CCAAs and then coming out of CCAA, and like, it happens all the time.
No, I'm not gonna say it doesn't happen.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna say it's not an option.
Mhm.
I'm not gonna say if I was in their shoes, I wouldn't explore it.
Maybe we should
I'm
edit
a
this out in case any LPs get the idea. Holy shit, that's a crazy good idea. I think we'll use that.
So, if you know Lithuanian Jews, it was always a center of Jewish and rabbinical scholarship, and one of the things that they would have taught us, as well as the broader community, is follow the law,
Yeah, yeah,
even when the law sucks.
yeah,
So, that's important for reasons which I'll get into in a second when I answer the question that you had.
yeah.
And you said, "Am I aware of any instance when the CRA knocked on a door and
Mhm.
said, pay me or you lose your license? And the answer is yes. It
Okay.
has happened. I won't mention a name
Yeah.
to protect some of the innocent that worked in at least one company,
Yeah.
but it absolutely happened to a company many people will know, and that company was gone in 48 to 72 hours.
Wow. Wow. Oh, okay. We'll talk about it offline. I think I know who you're talking about.
Right.
Yeah.
I don't
It
know
was a
the
quick
sir. I
one.
don't know how many enforcers showed up at the door for
Mhm.
RCMP,
Yeah.
and I don't know how it actually happened, but it has happened.
Yeah.
And that is always a risk in this
Right.
industry.
Yeah. You mentioned we'll get back to some of this, but you mentioned being at Benzinga and you got schooled a bit. What did you get schooled on? What who out there, first of all, has the ability no, who has the tenacity? No. But what are you finding you're like, aha. I think one of the things that I love about what I've seen, read, met, discussed with you previously is your ability to change your opinion on something when you feel you're wrong. You're not stuck on, no, this is the way it is. And those individuals, I've had as podcast guests, I've talked to them outside of this, and it's like you are so bullheaded and so stubborn. I try myself to be very similar. And that's why I ask just crazy questions on LinkedIn sometimes. I'm like, what about this? Because I don't know where I sit sometimes. But I love that when you learn something, you're objective enough to look at it and go, okay, hold on. Yeah, I think I can align with what you're saying. But you're at Benzinga. Seems like quite the event these days, from what I can tell, sitting where I sit, because I haven't been. But what were you schooled on? What was one of those aha moments or something that was like, oh yeah, I see that.
A classic example, and anybody who's not schooled on it, is a poser
Mm,
or, is in their own little echo chamber within the broader cannabis echo chamber.
okay.
So when you look at things like valuations, how are deals getting done in cannabis? So I'm talking about funding and lending money.
Yeah.
That who's getting the money under what conditions? That's an iterative, organic kind of situation where you're never an expert. I don't care who you are. Um, let's say you're the head of Chicago Atlantic, who's a terrific guy named Peter Sack.
Mhm.
Got all kinds of time for him. He might be one of those bellwethers that sets a lot of the tone for what are you lending at, under what terms, and what kind of relationships.
Okay.
But he also has competition
Mm,
who see things a little bit differently. And they might lend at lower rates or higher rates, based on securitization of the assets of the operator. And I'm not trying to get too into the jargon here, but they have a different point of view. And if I'm only going to listen to Peter, who, like I said, is one of the big thinkers in this industry and really good business guys. I
mhm.
don't think he listens to your podcast, but I'm going to send this to him so I look smarter. Um, I would say he has less than 50% of all the private credit availability in cannabis in the United States.
Hmm.
So if you only listen to him,
Yeah.
you're ignoring 70, 80, 60% of all the potential capital out there who might have a very different investment thesis, requirements, and so on. So anybody in capital markets who thinks they have all the answers in the latest data is myopic or an idiot,
Yeah.
or suffers from hubris, or all three. I saw people exhibiting all three of those characteristics at Benzinga. Some things, another one,
Yeah.
cultivation, good quality weeds, an art and a science. I'm good. I'm pretty good at following the science of it,
Mhm.
but the craft of it is something completely different.
Yeah.
And you got to talk to people. You have to be in the dirt. You have to f up so many times
Yeah.
to be able to and do the right pheno hunting to get that right. So how anyone, and this is, my California friends are going to hate me for this, but I say to them all the time, you guys are in one of the epicenters of cannabis.
Yeah. That's right.
But we do things pretty good up here in British Columbia. I've been to Africa for cannabis.
Yeah.
There are strains and cultivation techniques there that I've seen in places like Malawi and Zimbabwe that would blow anything away from what I ever saw in Humboldt County.
Crazy.
Those are just waiting to be discovered, and I wish I would spend enough time in places like that so I could become an expert.
Yeah,
I hate
yeah,
that term expert. It's
yeah.
douchey. But how do you not have an open mind in this kind of industry where there's just so many templates for success?
Yeah, and I think that's why you gotta understand from my vantage point or where I sit is I get to speak with, converse with so many intelligent individuals, and I feel like a rubber band at times, right? Because you think, okay, I've got it figured out, I've made my mind up, this is the way it is. But one thing that I've at least discovered as the truth or the constant is you have to be elastic. You have to be because it was the same in the early days. I've never claimed to be an expert. Even when I grew, I was never a master grower. I was none of that, right? I like to think, okay, I know enough to be dangerous with anything. And, so the regs come out early days. We start working with St. Vincent and the Grenadines. We take a liking to see Cannabis Licensing Authority, Dr. Thompson. He comes up, we meet, we go out to lunch, we do all these things. I end up in St. Vincent, and we're looking at as you're saying, different cultivars, land races, stuff going on there, and I'm like, oh shit, yeah, okay. Other than maybe trying to figure out how to dry this to move it into, a GMP type market. Interesting. But what I found really interesting was how all these other regions were looking back and reflecting at what Canada had done with legalization and drawing from those regs. And I'm like, whoa, hold on. There's certain areas of our regs that you do not want to follow. You're going to fall flat on your face. But again, it was having an open mind, understanding there's nuances throughout the industry. They're regional, they're country specific, they're province specific, they're, what goes on in Humboldt and Cali, different, right? Sure, up the West Coast, a little bit of similarity. But I think the biggest thing for me, again, was don't get so hard on standing ground on this is my opinion, this is the way it is, because you're going to change that if you're smart. What else was going on at Benzinga that, I think you like tech, you like data. You're definitely big on data. What's coming out? What's getting you excited in that realm? I know that you get a lot of the different companies, new entrants coming in when they'll get to MJ Unpacked and some of these others. Haven't been to an MJ Unpacked. I don't know if I'll ever go. I don't care to, whatever. But what's getting you excited in the world of data right now? Because there's different data types right now, right? So understanding retail and product and distribution, but then there's grow data, then there's or global data. Like, I don't know, man. There's so much going on.
Again, one of those massive omnibus questions that I'll try and distill it down. Okay. Uh,
That's my golden op is to get it all out.
no, I'm a big Howard Stern guy.
Yeah.
Like, and Howard Stern will ask the big
Yeah, just
question.
go around in a circle till I come back and go, "Oh, yeah, that's where I parked my car. I forgot."
No, no, it's great, but I don't want to bore your audience a little bit
Oh,
with
you won't
data,
bore anyone.
like,
Yeah, you won't bore
um,
anyone.
but I'm going to bring it down to, the base elements
Mhm,
now. There's a greater awareness of the importance of data in the industry. There wasn't for a long time.
mhm.
You mentioned cultivation, great example. Many people thought, I'll bring in a great master grower. He or she will know how to grow
Yeah.
because they did it in some other. So, yeah,
Did
data
it
was
did it in a
important.
closet in their dorm.
Right. Data was important. We got to monitor humidity. We get it. But we didn't understand the strategic value of the data, right?
Yeah.
So we're moving beyond, okay, let's collect it and let's look at it to how does it strategically enable our business? And you were talking about things like marketing and retail operations and, that kind of stuff. Absolutely. Um, so what we're beginning to see now are the strategic use of data, one to leverage insights from the data, the mine the data to figure out, okay, who's buying our products, for example, when and how and why, so we can, for example, close the demand supply gap,
Mhm.
so we don't have inventory. That's one example. But also then to look at that data and say, okay, how do we use data to go beyond just refining our business, changing the tone and brightness on our TV and computer,
Yeah.
and then potentially use it to outflank our competition. And this is where it's becoming really interesting because if you look at a lot of the capabilities of Canadian LPs and US MSOs and how they're using it, now you have the possibility to become more than just a cannabis company. You actually, if you know enough about your consumers and what they do, I hate to use these douchey marketing terms, but you can become like that lifestyle brand
Mm.
because you know more about the consumer than anybody else because a cannabis consumer or the cannabis consumers, there are many types of them, cross a lot of different boundaries. And that becomes very unique from a monetization perspective.
Mhm.
Um, and in terms of building the consumer journey, in terms of offering them different products, because we can slice and dice them from a psychographic standpoint, their
Yeah.
persona in very different ways. Now, one example of that, because some of your listeners are scratching their head and they're saying, "What the fuck are you talking about, Will?" It's, um, that's what cookies should be
Mm.
if they grow a decent product and they can get into, no disrespect to them, if they can get into new markets and
Yeah.
succeed.
Mhm.
Okay. What I'm talking about is the ability to have real strategic alliances with the live nations of the world. So that fusion of cannabis and entertainment, cannabis and music, we're going to start to see it a little bit in sports. It's going to happen very
Yeah.
quickly there, but that's what I'm talking about. And data powers that and enables that.
Mm. Interesting. Interesting. How does that how does that cascade into so I'm really curious if you could explain without giving away the secrets and free consulting. how how do you go about the approach and I'm thinking through my question here because it's got to be different market to market, province to province as well. But you're big on, testing SKUs, price volatility and adoption at least. How do you do that when you've got your cost per gram or at least your COGS? We'll just go COGS in general for right now. You've got that. You've got your wholesale relationship. Let's call it OCS, BCLD, whoever it is. You've got to wholesale it in at a certain price. Then they get their markup. What does that look like as a picture on a page? Like, because how do you? Let's say you enter market too low. We always said this, right? It's very difficult to go up in price. It's easier to come down in price. How does that? Do you understand where I'm trying to go with this? Like, how do you execute on a strategy like that when you've got so many gatekeepers, I guess? And how do you take that information to refine and improve your business?
So you are asking for free consulting, but
We'll section this part out and put it on Substack behind Paygate.
no, 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 it's good. I have the privilege of being on your show and the honor. So, I have to repatriate. So there's different ways to address your question. I'm not
Okay.
evading it. I'm gonna,
Yep.
but there's never one size fits all. There are
Sure.
there are many hacks and amateurs and pundits, both consultants and operators in this industry, where to every hammer, everything's a nail.
Yeah. Yeah.
These are the people that will say, cannabis is CPG or cannabis is alcohol, cannabis is, and cannabis is cannabis.
Yeah.
That's a realization for a lot of people now, but that wasn't 4 or 5 years ago.
Mm.
And you had to get in the dirt and fuck up, and I fucked up, and many other people, and learn from those things to stand back and go, okay, sometimes knowing what not to do is half the battle.
Yeah. It seems
You're
like a
you're
GI Joe commercial now.
you're joking, but you and I will go to a European conference,
Mhm.
and you will see Canada 2.0 evolving right there and then,
Right.
because those folks are too arrogant or unknowledgeable, whatever it is, to stand back and to talk to somebody like you or me and say, what worked, what didn't. How quickly did markets mature? How quickly did prices come? Now I'm tacking to your
Mhm.
question. So, the fact of the matter is there isn't one nuanced way to do it. There isn't one way to do it. Number two is it depends on the company and the strategy and what they want to do. If you don't, so first off, if you don't know where you want to go, it's hard to figure out what your pricing is going to be or your distribution if you don't have a purpose and a vision and a corporate goal. So
Mhm.
typically I start there. Where do you want to be when you finally grow up? And when you ask that question, you know, assuming you're asking people with big stakes in the business, like as investors,
Mhm.
what are their personal needs? So getting back to how are all these folks able to hang in there, a lot of it is they're still waiting for that grand slam to be hit,
Mm.
as they go up to bat, and they were striking out like crazy, and now they're starting to get on base. So there's still those hopes and dreams of getting that 10-20x payout, which might be possible for some companies. But if the company knows where it wants to go,
Mhm.
and the shareholders are aligned to that vision, because that's really important that everybody's connected. um, I take a very pragmatic and practical approach, which is about, are there any, this is how I would pose it to a management team. Let's start with some
Mhm.
hypotheses. And a hypothesis, anybody can look it up, but a hypothesis could be, we're going to be able to raise our prices. Let's assume I'm a retail store. We're going to be able to raise our prices, not in the high velocity, high volume, because consumers are much more price sensitive, but with rolling papers.
Mhm.
Because when you buy flour, do you care if your rolling papers are 50 cents more? Because no one's going to leave you if they're going to buy an ounce for 99 bucks to
Right.
save 50 cents, right?
Yeah.
So the hypothesis could be, we'll raise our prices on 80% of the SKUs that are low movers that we need to have in there for whatever reason, and we'll be very competitive on the 20%.
Mhm.
And on the 20%, we're going to be competitive. We'll assume we won't be cheaper, but we'll try and provide some sort of added value.
Mm.
So, for example, if it's, certain pre-rolls or so on at certain times of the spring and so on, we'll give way more bud tender attention to those consumers,
Yeah.
just to sort of differentiate ourselves from a client experience perspective.
Mm.
But for the rolling papers, they'll be in the corner. We don't really care whether we'll sell another 5 or 10 of them a day. They don't have to be seen. We don't have to use valuable real estate for that.
Yeah.
But everybody's going to ask, do you have any rolling papers? Yeah,
Right,
we've got
right.
them here. But what the consumer is going to see are the higher margin edibles that just got introduced, the $99, $79 ounces, that kind of stuff.
Mm.
So this is all hypotheses. We can validate it with data, their data, my data, third party data, like headset and all of that. And we can do it exactly what you teed me up earlier on, through tests and pilots.
Mm.
See what happens.
Yeah.
We're not going to go out of business by selling a few less ounces because we raised our price
Right,
a,
right.
a little too much.
But how many of these companies, so two questions, I'll try and keep them this way a little bit more this time, but how many of those companies are actually doing that? It seems, and I'll bring this back to what my overall question as you were explaining that is, out of the 200 plus companies you've worked with, don't all of them want to just hit grand slams? Like, are there any reasonable companies that say, we'll be okay with, let's say with their Canadian operations, we're okay with 3 provinces. As long as we're doing really well in those, we're okay with it. Or are they all, because I haven't heard a lot of those ones. Some of the craft growers and those micros that they just want to service their own areas, maybe their own province at max. Sure. But outside of that, almost everyone I talk to has got the best weed. They're going to be the biggest in the world. They're all going to take the world by storm. Are there any reasonable clients that you've worked with that are like, "Yeah, no, no, this is what we want to do. We just want to take Canada or 3 of the provinces, maybe one of the territories when they get a little bit better." I don't know.
Yes.
Okay. So there's hope.
Yes.
What percentage? Can we put it into a percentage?
Okay, so I've got a big ego. I'm proud of the work I've done, but for your viewing audience, the 220 plus clients I've worked with are around the world. They're not only in Canada.
That's right.
Okay,
Yep.
so I want to be very clear about that, and they're all at different stages of development. So that's another important point.
Mhm.
Um, because when you're an early stage startup and you're trying to stand up and grow, those are very different strategic and tactical considerations than if you're Canopy,
Mhm.
as a completely other side of the spectrum. So we run the gamut of challenges and issues and questions.
Yeah.
But I'll say now in 2025, we have in Canada at least a lot more sensible, judicious, built to last cannabis companies out there
Mhm.
than we did a mere 1 to 2 years ago.
Okay.
It's nowhere near enough But on the other hand, it gives me more than glimmers of hope that winning companies, and some are public and many are private, are joining the world stage and finally receiving the accolades and the respect that they deserve. Now, having said that, it's like we were existing in an industry for many years where you were doing well if you got a D grade because most companies were failing.
Yeah.
The bar keeps getting moved up, and I would say there are some companies out there that are getting Bs.
Mm.
If you compare it to the P&Gs of the world who are 175 years old, I mean, let's keep that in
Yeah, yeah.
perspective.
Yeah.
And the Constellations,
Mhm.
these Canadian companies and some US companies still have a ways to go. They know that, but they're certainly on the right track. And I'm confident should their luck hold out, because luck is a big issue in this business, as you know,
Yes.
should they continue to, foster continuous improvement, because for a lot of them, that's what they're all about, they will become strong players.
Mm.
That is either going to happen by them organically growing into that. So what we've seen in Canadian cannabis is a lot of smallish, mid-sized companies vault into the top 10.
Yeah. Yeah.
They'll continue to do that, but some of them will be swallowed up or will merge with either their peers or somebody coming in from CPG or alcohol or what have you, and they will buy them and they
Mm.
will accelerate their growth.
Right.
But again, I can end good news with without some sober bad news. Um, w- we this industry can handle. I don't know how many operators we have today. Let's say it's 500. Canada can't handle 500 cannabis companies producing product.
Right.
And for anybody who's gonna blast me in chat about, hey, look at the wine industry and the craft beer industry. The wine industry is an oligopoly. Four or five companies control 80% of the volume. Same in beer. That remaining 20% of craft beer and wine,
Yeah.
if you're not exclusive and premium product and have unbelievable brands, you're either a hobby business or you're on the road to evaporation and failure. That is the bitter reality of capitalism.
Mm.
And people better get used to that because that's coming to cannabis.
Yeah. Wow, that's a great point. Great point. I mean, as much as we look at M&A activity and what's been going on and hypothesize on what could potentially happen, I don't know any other industry where you've got that many separate players trying to dominate the same industry. It's very strange. It's like everyone thinks they're Tyson in the ring from the, early 90s, late 80s. Like it's crazy. Let me ask you this just in that same vein though.
Sure.
How many how many have an actual exit strategy? And I don't know if that's at the beginning. I mean, most you've got an MBA.
Yeah.
Most great business plans would also include, at least for the internal investment crew, they'll have some sort of exit. What is the exit strategy here, Tom? How are we getting our money out? How are we cashing in? How long? And what does that look like? Are they able to even develop these in the cannabis industry when it comes to an exit strategy?
That's a
Without a forced exit strategy, that is?
That's a brilliant question. It's a simple yet brilliant question. And you ready for the big answer?
Yes.
I don't have a clue.
We're fucked. We're doomed. Mitchell doesn't Mitchell doesn't have an answer to it. We're done.
No, no, I
It
don't.
feels the reason I ask Mitchell is I remember the early days. I remember sitting at coffee tables. I remember sitting in coffee shops and we're doing this. We're going to be a micro. Well, as micros didn't even exist at the time. We're going all in. We've got millions behind us. Tom, you should come work for us. I'm like, nope, I'm not doing that. And then another conversation. Tom, you should come work for us. And I would ask a lot of times, not every time, but a lot of times I'd say, but what's the exit strategy? Like, we don't even know this industry. What is the exit strategy? You talk to me about tech, I'll tell you, okay, then we're going to scale it. We're going to, be adopted by this many. And when we hit this number, we're exiting. We'll find a buyer. But otherwise, I don't really see it in cannabis. I don't know if everyone just loves the plant so damn much. They're like, exit. That's a foreign word to us.
Okay, so let me stop being a smartass for a second and actually offer a perspective of some data points, which I think will help answer your question,
Mm,
at least tangentially. Um, Cannabis is no longer mentioned on Constellation analyst calls anymore.
Oh, hmm.
Do you
Wow.
think do you think Constellation really cares about their cannabis exit strategy
I
today?
don't think they ever cared about cannabis to begin with, other than we're going to invest, and if it flies, it's like almost like at a roulette table. You're like, I'm just going to put this one over here on the double zeros, zero double zeros as well. Just a little safety on some of that money that I've got out. That's the way I've always thought. Bat, Japan Tobacco as they move in, Constellation. I've looked at it the same with all of these guys. That's a drop in the bucket, the amount of money they have.
That was, what, a 4 billion, $4.5 billion drop
Four and a
in the
half
bucket.
billion. Yeah.
Yeah, but, I'll say a couple of things. That I don't know.
Mm.
Like, the problem in our industry is unless you're at the boardroom, you don't know jack about
Right.
what actually goes on. No, I'm being very
True.
serious.
That's so true.
That's why I'm always hedging a lot. If you read my stuff, you'll know I'm accused of it quite often, but it's just being a little modest because you have to be in the room to be able to answer the question you just asked me.
Yeah.
What's the exit strategy? Who knows? Like for some people, they're harvesting tax losses to offset the gains in their portfolios. I can tell you that as a fact,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
I can tell you, I'm talking about the big high net worth
Yeah. Yeah.
investors who
Yeah.
fund it. They don't give a shit about this. They needed the losses and they're happy.
Yeah.
Retail and long suffering retail investors, you can read uh, all their invective on X. They're bitter, but many of them are still hoping and praying for the comet to hit the earth, or they've written off their investments. So they have no exit strategy whatsoever.
Mhm.
I will say that in the cases of Constellation and some of them, and I think you would probably agree with this, many of those larger companies wanted to learn about cannabis, wanted a
Mm.
beachhead so they can start collecting data and getting a feel for the industry and who their players are. How do I know that? I've worked as a consultant to these firms who were smart enough to go, we'll just hire a guy like Mitchell for 100,000 bucks
Yeah.
for 3 or 4 months. He'll teach us a lot. We'll keep his ear in the industry,
Mhm.
and we don't have to invest $4.5 billion to learn it.
Yeah.
And those folks are smart. They need to understand cannabis on the periphery.
Mhm.
Like if you're an alcohol company, you need to keep your eye out on cannabis, or if you're a pharmaceutical company. But the learning is a big part of why many of them are still in it because they want to keep their finger in a pulse of it.
Yeah.
At the same, and we're talking about the big shots, the big capital
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
institutional capital. At the same time, many of them are trying to influence regulatory policy and so on, particularly in the United States, to create more favorable conditions for them to enter at a certain point.
Mm.
I'm telling you all of this as a reason why many of them haven't bailed and they don't have an end state. Their end state is to keep learning and to position themselves when it becomes an appealing market.
Yeah.
For the for the founding teams, getting right into the question, some of them just got religion
Mm.
and are never going to shake it.
Yeah.
Others are in so deep, behavioral psychologists will call it sunk cost bias, right? They can't extricate themselves
Okay.
because they've devoted, millions of their dollars, many years to this. They're too deep. They can't pull the ripcord. It's too
Mhm.
late.
Yeah. Yeah.
Others, and I'll just, finish with this, do see the pot at the end of the rainbow.
Mm.
If valuations increase, if you get positive catalysts from a regulatory US federal legalization perspective, if that happens, that's not a when question, by the way. I say if that
Yeah.
happens,
If yeah.
you're going to see valuations of Canadian and US publicly listed companies immediately shoot up substantially,
Mm.
which will put a lot of investors either in the money or closer to the money than where they were before.
Right. Right. That's smart. And you're right. When it came to the big money that moved in from other industry, I'll just keep that as general other industry right now. When I would talk to individuals, they'd be like, "What are they doing? Why are they not moving? Why?" And I'm like, they're just testing the water. Like this is their they've bought in at the poker table, but they're not really playing a lot of hands yet. They'll start coming on hard when the time is right because
Right.
They've been around. They've seen the maneuvers. Sure, it's cannabis, but it's highly regulated, and they come from industries that are highly regulated, and they've got the money. They this is nothing right now. And we joke and say 4.5 billion is a drop in the bucket, but for these companies, it really is. Like it's not
Right.
that much. They bought in at the table. They're waiting until, things kind of just, it's now the 11th hour. We're getting close to midnight, right? And once we hit there, we're going to see some big moves, and that's what I think. Mitchell,
Yeah. So,
go ahead.
so because you were interested in Benzinga, so I'll tell you quickly about a Benzinga conversation
Yeah.
I had. And again, Tom, I'm not that smart, but I can read and I can Google, and I'm not the biggest Chat GPT user because I don't need to be. Um, and I was overhearing some big shot American bankers, and to all my American brothers and sisters, I love you. My son lives in the United States, but you guys aren't as smart as you think you are.
Were they in Cadillacs with cigars? I was
No, no, they weren't those guys. They were, you know, they were talking about how, alcohol sales are down.
Yeah.
They're not they're actually not down if when you parse the data, but how they're down and cannabis is replacing that, and how the cannabis industry is a mortal threat to alcohol.
Mm,
And I said, wait 1 second. And what I did was I think I Googled, it was Constellation or somebody's market cap. And then which is like, I remember what, 300 billion. I forgot what the number was.
mm,
And I, looking at my phone, but without telling them, I said, what do you think the combined market cap is of the top 10 MSOs in the United States? And, I don't know what they said, 10, 12 billion, 15 billion. And I said, and compare that to 300 billion. And you think anybody is afraid of you? They can buy you this entire. Am I wrong? I'm a
no.
corporate finance MBA. They can buy this entire industry with nary a dent to their balance sheet.
Yeah.
And and then when they said, well, but their sales are going down and ours not, and the public markets haven't reflected that. Like the public markets like BlackRock, like Carlisle,
Yeah,
like
Vanguard,
Apollo,
Vanguard, like, come on.
Vanguard. Oh, right. They're stupid and
Yeah,
we're smarter.
yeah,
And then I said, no, but these are good people. These are
yeah,
not dumb
yeah,
people, right?
yeah.
And then I said, so why did Warren Buffett just poured a ton of money into an alcohol company?
Yes, yeah.
And they said, well, he's old. It's like,
Yeah, well, yeah,
wow.
yeah. You
Oh,
were you saying
okay.
Warren Buffett's not sharp anymore?
Yeah, yeah.
That's
Like,
blasphemy.
yeah. So this is a bit of the problem in our industry in general,
Yeah.
particularly when these kinds of issues. So the companies that I'm very proud to associate with and to follow who are starting to win are the ones that are mature, judicious, sensible, professional, and going, okay, this is sort of how it's evolving.
Mm,
Let's do it sensibly in the right way.
yeah.
I'm sorry, I had to say that.
No, I think it makes sense. Okay, so doesn't have to be positive, doesn't have to be negative, but I am curious. Typically, it's gonna lean towards positive. What gets you excited about the industry right now and into the next 12 months?
So I actually anticipated this question 1 hour and 6 minutes ago. So so timing is everything, and I missed it. And
Yeah.
the answer I was gonna, what excites me is being in a dynamic industry that helps people,
Mm,
obviously,
mhm.
but that emerges from nothing, almost nothing legally into something
Yeah.
flourishing, something global. That is still excites me today in 2025 versus when I did my first project in 2016.
Wow.
So even though Canada is slowing, lots of signs of maturing and certain US markets are maturing, there's still plenty of growth in those markets with the segments that you talked about earlier, new users coming in, new use cases, applications,
Mhm.
still plenty of gas left in Canada for growth.
Yeah.
And then when we look at internationally, where I spend a good chunk of my time focused on
Mhm.
South America, Africa, Europe, Israel, and now increasingly Asia and Australia, those are on much steeper growth trajectories.
Right.
And their stories haven't even unfolded yet. Like Germany, as an example, only getting into cannabis consumption
Mhm.
consumption clubs. Switzerland, a cannabis recreational cannabis pilot. Like we're like literally back to 2016 when you're looking at new markets.
Yeah.
So what keeps me excited? This industry is evolving in so many different ways and permutations and trajectories. it's a very cool industry, but again, like everybody, focus, 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 right?
Yep, yep. So let me ask you this last question. So out of all those markets, because I've seen a lot of starts and stops, right? I'm thinking back to Colombia and Jamaica and even Germany in some aspects. Australia, I remember early days they were coming to Ample Organics and asking about compliance and how do we do this and how do we do that,
Yep.
and then they stayed medical. They're like, no, no, we're not going to. Are there any that are they're trying to catch up to Canada that you fear may be moving too quickly and will fall on their faces?
No, none.
Okay.
No, they're in fact going slower, more deliberately.
Mm,
We did see an abject failure and reset. That was called Thailand a couple years
right.
ago.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So they're doing a mulligan there.
Mhm.
That's good. And now dumping product into Australia and destroying that market. So I'm not sure that's even a good mulligan.
Yeah.
Um, Poland is taking a bit of a step back
Mm,
because their business exploded in the last year, 18 months, mostly through the onset of telemedicine platforms and prescription.
yeah.
It looks like the government is going to start to rein that in a little bit, which is not a bad thing.
Mhm.
I like that. Um, but I think the problem in some of these markets is a similar thing to what we have in the United States, which is they're too slow. They're moving in fits and starts.
Mm.
I made a comment about nanny states. Like, if you talk to regulators in some of these countries, you're scratching your head and like I scratched my head in 2016 talking to Health Canada bureaucrats saying, cannabis is a pretty benign product. Like, you ask any doctor, they'll tell you
Yeah.
we don't have to have them so protected, in packaging and so on that I couldn't even open it, let alone a child.
Yeah.
We can let the foot off the brake a little bit.
Right.
The world's not gonna come to an end. And many celebrate, Germany's very methodical approach, but they don't need that at this point. They could go as fast, if not faster than Canada,
Mm.
and still have unbelievably great outcomes for patients, healthcare practitioners, and lo and behold, companies. Because what's wrong with companies succeeding, hiring more employees, investing in R&D, and so
Yeah.
on? And those are all positive goods. And I don't have to tell you, those people and companies also pay taxes that support our healthcare system and
Mhm.
our defense and so on. So what bothers me is many of these regions, for kind of understandable regions, reasons are still a little too cautious
Mm.
and skeptical. And it's sort of like, come on, guys,
Yeah. Yeah.
wake up.
The skepticism is kind of funny when there's so much data now. Yeah, I still scratch my head in certain areas, but I am glad to see certain regions or countries putting heavy emphasis on the medical still. I think that there's a lot of road to travel there still. I'm hoping to see that in Canada again. Maybe we come back to it a little bit, but I think there'll be a resurgence at some point in time. I think it's just a matter of where is it going to make monetary sense, right? Who's going to capitalize on it? At the end of the day, please stop taxing it. Jeez, that's one, but I can't see that going anywhere. Anyways,
Well, sorry, I'll just add one final thought to
yeah.
that, because this is always an issue in the industry when I talk to people, and this was right in Benzinga. There's two overwhelming forces, or like, even I can use the term inertia, that
Mm,
plagues this sector. And one of them is, I think, regardless of the geography, cannabis companies and people are not great lobbyists for their industry.
uh,
They frankly suck. I
yeah.
mean, look at what we've done in Canada. How many different industry associations,
Oh, there's so
even
many.
today, we have multiple ones. Not everybody rallies around them. There's a different agendas. It's these ideological bun fights that pervade them. We're just lousy at approaching the government as compared to tobacco, pharma, and alcohol and CPG, right?
Yeah.
So that's number one. And that's true everywhere.
Hmm.
Number two, the opposite side of that is, again, what a lot of cannabis cheerleaders don't always understand is that governments don't give a shit about cannabis.
Oh, they
When
don't.
you when you rank, like in Germany, let's use Germany as an example.
Hmm.
Rise of right-wing extremism, anti-immigration stuff. Like, I'm going through all the things that actually bother people on a day-to-day basis. Economy, immigration, environment, Ukraine. Like, should I keep going?
Yeah,
Like,
exactly.
um, there's five right off the bat that are way more important. in an election, how many issues do you think any government is going to deal with and try and address?
Yeah. Yeah.
We're just not that important
No.
at the
Well,
end of
and
the day.
I to your point to your point about all of the, industry associations or those trying to I love getting behind them. I'll support them. I promote them. I'm like, "Yes, you're right." But in many cases, it's so many starts and stops. It reminds me of that late night stoner idea that you think was the best idea ever. You pen it, you get up in the morning and you're like, what the fuck was I thinking? It's just,
Totally.
that's what it feels like sometimes. And I don't know if it's
Totally.
just because it's our industry or what it is. I'm not sure. Yeah, I don't know. One day we'll figure it out. Well, maybe we'll have an answer the next time I get you back on.
Oh, that would be great. I can that c and, there's a lot to talk about, and a lot of things will be changed by then, I
Oh,
guarantee it.
yeah, absolutely. Well, we won't wait so long, and hopefully there will be something that comes. But listen, Mitchell, I appreciate you joining me. I've been wanting to do this for so long. I'm glad that John introduced us. I've been meaning to reach out, but here we are. We got it, and now it's going to go live. I really appreciate it.
Well, I appreciate your time. You asked some amazing fundamental questions.
Oh, thank you.
And the best thing this industry can do is address the fundamental core issues, right? Like, how do you do shit?
Yeah,
How do you become more competitive with 500 competitors?
that's tough. That's tough.
That
Hopefully, there's some answers in there.
Yeah, and, people don't ask them enough, and, I'm happy to answer them, and I'm glad there are, sort of mouthpieces like you and people asking those, because growing the highest THC is not gonna sustain your survival in this competitive environment right now.
I agree with that 100%. Well, thanks, Mitchell. I appreciate it. We'll connect again, and we'll have you back on.
Thank you, Tom. Be well.
Thanks.